This is Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
I'm the only lawyer ever to obtain a court ruling that a president of the United States committed a crime.
For truth. For competition.
As a young lawyer, I helped break up AT&T. That's why you have all your cell phones today.
For sovereignty. For the Republic.
I'm the guy who, at Judicial Watch, which I founded, uncovered the Chinagate scandal. Millions of dollars going to the Clinton campaign, corrupting our political system.
For the privacy of citizens.
And I'm the only guy to have enjoined the National Security Agency from mass surveillance on hundreds of millions of Americans.
Tearing it up.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
Bringing it back.
We're going to take this country apart and put it back together again in the way envisioned by our founding fathers.
It's not just talk.
We're not just regurgitating news stories. Larry Klayman, special prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. We have a really great show here today, and my good friend Jason Goodman, who just happens to be the editor-in-chief of Crowdsource The Truth, a very talented individual, very knowledgeable, and very concise in terms of his thinking, is here with me. And we've got some really big news. But I want to start off by saying that there's an article in the Politico this morning. Of course, that's that left-wing rag here in Washington, D.C. By the way, it's extremely cold this weekend in Washington. I guess maybe that's typical of the environment here in terms of the way people get along. But the news this day from Politico is that Mueller and his staff are looking definitely to indict Trump. They don't know if they legally can do it yet. Someone by the name of Ronald Rotunda, he's a professor at a law school out in California who's actually a friend of mine, wrote a memo back in the Nixon days where he theorized that a president could be indicted. However, it was under different circumstances. That was under the independent counsel law. Now we have a special counsel law, which is under the aegis of the Justice Department. It's not independent, so it remains to be seen. But we know that they're seeking to indict Mueller. They're looking for something to do that. And in that context, we also learned today that General Mike Flynn, his sentencing is being held off. You know, he pled guilty to making an alleged false statement to the FBI, of all people. I mean, how do you make a false statement to an agency basically that lies as a matter of course? But that's an interesting concept. But in any event, they're holding it off, and that probably is not good news in terms of what Mueller intends to do. It means either he is not cooperating and giving Mueller what he wants to be able to make good on the plea agreement, which was to plead to one count of lying under 18 U.S.C. 1001 and not have to do any time served, or they're holding the plea agreement over his head to have him testify at a criminal trial against Trump, Manafort, and others to make sure that he makes good on his promises. So that's where we are today. Now, I think General Flynn is an honorable man. I don't think he's going to lie to implicate Trump or Manafort or anybody else. But this is Mueller's game. It's an evil game. He's got evil co-prosecutors who are highly partisan. And, of course, when you layer that on top of the news today, which is the release of the Nunes memorandum, which details political corruption at the FBI and the Justice Department, it's a very, very serious situation. And that's why I ask you to go to freedomwatchusa.org. freedomwatchusa.org. Sign our petition. Already we have about 15,000 signatures. We're getting hundreds each day to have me named as special counsel. So I will be able to investigate the Clintons for their crimes and Obama and everybody else. And more importantly, to be investigating Mueller and his staff. We need a counter investigation. He should be removed. And we are also filing lawsuits and have filed lawsuits to have him removed. And you can see that at freedomwatchusa.org. If it's not Larry Klayman to do the job, it won't be anybody, I can assure you that, because everybody in this town, does it for dough. They don't do it for the real reasons to do it, and they're part of this establishment, and that goes right across the board. Now let's talk about this Nunes memorandum, which came out just on Friday. And, of course, President Trump had to approve that. He did. He did the courageous thing. He went up against the bureaucracy at the FBI and at the Department of Justice. And I was once a proud alumnus. You know that. I was a former federal prosecutor. I helped break up AT&T. I represented the FTC, the CPSC, Consumer Product Safety Commission, and a number of other agencies. And I was really proud to have worked there, even though I left because I wanted to start my own Justice Department someday, which I did. And that was Freedom Watch today and earlier Judicial Watch. But Trump did the right thing. And he went up against the FBI Director Christopher Wray, who I hope he does resign. He threatened he would resign if Trump authorized release of this memo. This guy's a kid. He just doesn't have gravitas. He doesn't have any strength. He's been covering his backside with higher-level FBI agents. He looks like he's a duck out of water. He looks like a deer in the headlights. He went up against Trump, and he said this would cause grave damage to national security. Well, now we see that it doesn't cause grave damage. You can find that memorandum. We're going to post it on our website at freedomwatchusa.org, and Jason's going to have it. And I did an interview this morning with Jason on Crowdsource The Truth. I urge you to go to that website and see that as well. Jason's a very excellent interview as well as an intellect. So we now have this memorandum, and what does it show? It shows that that phony GPS, Fusion GPS dossier by this discredited British spy, Christopher Steele, was used to get a wiretap of Carter Page, who was working with, of course, President Trump's campaign and possibly later the transition. He had gone to Russia, and they used that to wiretap him. And then by doing that, they wiretapped a number of other people. They got an illegal Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court warrant, and that was the pretext. And it's now clear, based on the documentation that Chairman Nunes got as head of the Intelligence Committee, that that was a discredited dossier. The FBI knew that. They knew that Hillary Clinton and Democrats had paid for it, yet they did not disclose that to the judge at the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court who signed these warrants on at least 3 occasions. They were reauthorized. And participating in this illegality, participating in this fraud, participating in this subterfuge of our legal system was none other than former FBI Director James Comey and the current Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. They all knew about this. They knew that it was an unverified dossier, but they put it forward in any event. Of course, we know about Comey. We know that he's two-faced. We know that he lies. We know that he took documents out illegally from the FBI when he left to try to trigger this Mueller investigation, which he succeeded at doing. But this was also the trigger for Mueller. So it's based upon a false premise, this investigation of President Trump, his family, and people around him. And frankly, the indictments of Flynn, the indictments of Manafort should be thrown out, but they won't be because they're in front of a very partisan leftist hack judge by the name of Amy Berman Jackson, who I've talked about on previous shows. I won't take the time up now to talk about that, but that's symptomatic of the federal court in D.C., very highly partisan leftist judges. There's only 3 who are Republicans, and of the 3 that are Republicans, not all of them, have a lot of strength in what they do. But that's the reality we now find ourselves in. And there's also something that's also very interesting about this disclosure. It's an individual by the name of Bruce Orr, who was formerly number 3 at the Justice Department. He was demoted when this first leaked, that this was coming out, the Nunes memo and other information about his implication. His wife worked for Fusion GPS, and he's highly partisan. And he hid all of this, that his wife worked for Fusion GPS, and he participated in this illegal warrant as well. He was head of the FBI Organized Crime Task Force, and I had experience with him back in the 1990s, in the late 90s, when a client of mine, Peter Paul, when I was at Judicial Watch, came forward with absolute proof that Hillary Clinton had received $2 million in hard money campaign contributions. She knew about it. It was illegal. Peter had put on a Hollywood tribute to Bill Clinton, which was a fundraiser for Hillary Clinton's Senate campaign. The tribute was to Bill Clinton when he was leaving office. And Orr, who sat over that investigation and had his lawyers and investigators go to Brazil with me on at least 3 occasions because Peter himself was being investigated. Peter had asked me to defend him if he would spill the beans on the Clintons, and we agreed at Judicial Watch. But he was, in fact, indicted, and he was arrested in Brazil. He had a company there, and he was put in a Brazilian prison, ultimately extradited. So we went down there, and Peter was cooperating with Orr and his investigators, and Orr covered it all up. So it's nothing new for Orr that he's a partisan, that he covered it up for Hillary, that he wanted to do a number on Donald Trump and the people around Donald Trump, like Carter Page, General Flynn, and others. And I'll tell you something. The moral to this story, it's an immoral to this immoral story is that my alma mater, the Justice Department, of which I was once a proud alumnus, even though I left to form my own Justice Department because I certainly saw that there were flaws, and they wouldn't prosecute people who knew the right individuals at the Justice Department but would prosecute those who didn't. The hard fact is this Justice Department has become a cesspool of corruption. And, of course, the FBI is part of the Justice Department. And when we have no law enforcement agency to defend us, then the American people are left defenseless. And that's the reason for Freedom Watch. That's the reason that we have Freedom Watch. It's the reason I founded Judicial Watch. But Judicial Watch today spends its time getting documents mostly. It's because it's run by Tom Fitton, who's not a lawyer. So when I left to run for the Senate, they changed the mission. Now, it's good to get documents, but what are you going to do with the documents? I've said this before. You got to bring hard-hitting cases to bring about justice because we have no Justice Department, particularly when it's being run by an ostrich by the name of Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who himself is under investigation and won't take any strong action. So I want you to go to freedomwatchusa.org, freedomwatchusa.org, sign our petition, contribute to our cause. We need to ramp up. We need to hire more people. We need to file more lawsuits. It's kind of like a Merv missile with these judges these days. If you have 10 warheads, 10 cases, if one gets through, that's great. And we've had some major successes in the last several years, as I've talked about on this show. When we come back, I'm going to introduce you to Jason Goodman, and we're going to talk about the ramifications of what just happened today with the release of the Nunes Memo and what's likely to occur in terms of people hopefully losing their jobs. Of course, that's very difficult in Washington, D.C., and we're going to explore the entire aspect of this very sordid history of the republic of this country, which, frankly, at this point, makes Watergate look like a warm-up act. We'll be right back. And in the meantime, go to freedomwatchusa.org and sign our petition, support our cause, because you need to be part of our citizens' army. We all need to rise up and bring this country back to where it was at the days of our Declaration of Independence.
Dangerous.
Don't care. Use the court and the law.
Lethal.
This is bad.
Special prosecutor.
Very bad.
Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
I'm back with Jason Goodman, the editor-in-chief of Crowdsource The Truth. Jason, introduce yourself, and you're a great talent. And I want you to give your thoughts on what this Nunes memo means in terms of this country and where we go from here.
Well, thanks for having me on, Larry. It's great to be here with you. The memo, obviously everyone's been anticipating its release for months, really. I remember seeing Devin Nunes, he was sort of shocked by the way he was being derided back when this thing first started being spoken about. But, I feel like we're learning quite a lot during the Trump presidency. I don't think the average American had any idea what some of these opposition research firms were all about. If you're not in Washington, D.C., it's not the kind of, I don't know anybody that works for an opposition research firm, but now we hear about Fusion GPS and Greenberg, Quinlan, Rosner, and these companies are obviously up to a lot of...
Yeah, they're smear artists. That's what they are.
Yeah. I mean, opposition research, it's one thing to go research someone and find information about something factual that might be damaging or compromise their ability to effectively act as a public servant. But these guys are just fiction writers coming up with stories about nonsense. And there's a number of revelations about Christopher Steele. First of all,
in this Nunes memo.
In the Nunes memo, yeah. Obviously, talking about how he was directly paid $160,000 by the DNC in the Clinton campaign. Why would they be providing information to the FBI?
Well, and the FBI was paying for it as well. That's also in their memorandum.
He's double dipping.
Right.
But, the other thing that it reveals is that Mr. Steele was actually released as an FBI informant because he leaked information to the press. So this guy was going all over the place. He did an interview with Yahoo News that was positioned as corroborating the dossier, but actually Yahoo News got the information from Steele. So it was just...
Yeah, it was It's kind of like double hearsay, but false hearsay. And the guy who wrote that story for Yahoo News is Michael Isikoff, who was the person who discovered Monica Lewinsky but was suppressed from publishing that at Newsweek because Newsweek was owned by NBC. And Matt Drudge ultimately got the story about Lewinsky, and he broke it. But Isikoff was the guy that had it first, interestingly enough.
I am very suspicious of Newsweek. Kurt Eichenwald is an editor there, and he has put out a lot of obviously false, even contradicting himself in some of his statements, and was one of the original sources, at least that I was aware of the whole Russia collusion thing. Back in October, he was talking about Trump must be working with the Russians because he was reading a document from WikiLeaks.
It's always been very leftist, Newsweek.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, Carter Page, why was he targeted, Larry? Why is he just the weakest link in the chain?
Weak link. I was going to say exactly that word. They needed to get a hold of somebody, so they used him as the pawn to get to Trump.
I feel like this document gives us a lot of insight into how the FBI works, and also when we look at it in the context of the way Adam Schiff and even Christopher Wray were acting yesterday and the days leading up to the release, you know, we can see why they didn't want it coming out, because it almost makes them look like the Keystone Cops. I mean, they're paying guys who can't keep their, you know, they're just like going on every news show and giving the information out.
Except they were on a mission. Yeah. They are the Keystone Cops. I mean, they committed crimes here. They didn't succeed at covering them up. I mean, when the so-called premier law enforcement agency in the world, the Justice Department and its FBI, can't cover things up. I mean, not that they should, but it shows you how they're also incompetent thieves.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
It's quite remarkable.
Sorry.
Go on.
Well, another thing that the Nunes memo reveals, and this is a quote, so presumably Steele actually said this. Christopher Steele said he was desperate that Donald Trump not get elected and was passionate about him not being president. So, I mean, they've just totally hired a smear artist. And, I mean, there was one video or photo that I had seen of Steele where he just looked like a guy who's been busted. He looked pretty nervous.
Well, he was the stooge as well. Okay,
yeah.
They had two stooges. They had Bruce Orr in there, who was the head of the crime task force, wiring this thing. His wife was working for Fusion GPS.
Right.
No one knew about that. It's a complete sham of a sham of a sham of a sham, as Woody Allen would say.
Right.
That's what it is. And it was a setup. And this is perhaps the biggest scandal in modern American history that at least has been exposed. Chinagate, which I uncovered at Judicial Watch, probably was equally as big. But this is major. And we're going to talk about it when we get back. We're going to bring in a friend, Charles Ortel, who's an investigator from New York. And he'll give his thoughts as well, and we'll explore all of these issues. But in the meantime, please go to freedomwatchusa.org, sign the petition to have me appointed special counsel, support our removing Mueller legally. We actually have lawsuits to do this. We'll be right back.
And now, 4 words that make corrupt politicians make wee-wee in their little pants.
Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
Be the one who makes our country great again. Go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate.
We're back with Jason Goodman, and we have Charles Ortel joining us on the line. He's former financial manager. He's an investigator. He's a very bright individual. I want to continue on with this discussion of what's in this Devin Nunes memorandum from the House Intelligence Committee. It talks about the involvement of high-level Justice Department officials, not just Bruce Orr that we were talking about, but also Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. He was, of course, the U.S. Attorney for Obama in the District of Maryland. He's an Obama holdover. He played a role at this time, and this was before the Trump administration, in wiring this fraudulent FISA warrant. And he was asked, President Trump was asked today, right after the memorandum came out, last Friday he was asked, are you going to fire Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein? And his response was, correctly, you figure it out. So the man's a goner. I mean, people are warning the president, don't fire him because this will create a firestorm. It'll cause you to be impeached, blah, blah, blah. But this is what I really love about President Trump. He does, I believe, what he thinks is right. He's not worried about appearances. He doesn't try to sugarcoat things. This guy Rosenstein is dirty, and he should be fired. And there are other people at the Justice Department just as dirty. And one was James Baker, and we're going to talk about what he did with regard to Dennis Montgomery, a whistleblower who had even more information than Snowden. And that was covered up when I took Montgomery to the FBI. The investigation was to be handled by James Comey. I had a federal judge introduce me to Baker, and Baker said that Comey was going to supervise it. They took all of Montgomery's information, 600 million pages, 47 hard drives, showing massive illegal surveillance against Supreme Court justices, other judges, prominent businessmen like Trump, yours truly, me, anybody who criticized or challenged the government, or who was anybody that they could possibly blackmail. And Comey took the stuff off the market with Baker and buried it. This is a scandal that's been sitting there. I took it to Chairman Nunes many, many months ago. He ignored my request to investigate, but fortunately, at least he's doing this. And hopefully, after we finish with what went on with this phony FISA warrant, we can get them to investigate that as well. But I'm not waiting for that to happen. I don't base what I do hoping that Congress will do anything, which they've done nothing, in all these many years. I mean, they're certainly getting a lot of publicity today. We'll see what ultimately happens. Nor do I wait for the Justice Department to do anything. We are your private Justice Department at Freedom Watch, and you go to freedomwatchusa.org and sign our petition to have me appointed special counsel and also to support our cases to have Robert Mueller removed. So anyway, I want to turn it back to Jason because I want people to understand exactly what's in this memorandum, and I want your thoughts too, Charles, because this is a very dark day in American history when we find out that our Justice Department, which includes the FBI, is so highly corrupted.
Well, Larry, the New York Times and CNN and the like have called me and some of my associates conspiracy theorists, but just even glancing at this memo, it details the scope of a conspiracy that's almost hard to imagine. And, just in addition to the people that you've spoken about, we've heard that Christopher Wray had a very violent reaction, I believe yesterday, doing what was described as a 180. And just seeing the reporting in CNN versus something like, True Pundit or something more on the right, CNN was describing this as, Trump going against the FBI. But why is there no questioning of the FBI when they go against the office of the presidency, particularly with all of this obviously problematic information? I find it very strange. And also, I want to talk a little bit about how people keep comparing this to Watergate. And it's really the scope of the conspiracy that is most intriguing to me, because Watergate really was Richard Nixon and a couple of guys in an office executing a plan. This, we've got people in the FBI, we've got, Adam Schiff and his associates in Congress covering for all this sort of stuff. It's kind of astounding. I think it blows Watergate out. It makes Watergate look like a liquor store robbery.
It does. And you're absolutely right. This is a coup d'etat from within our own government. This is something that, they make Hollywood movies about. 7 Days in May.
Yeah.
I can't explain it. I mean, it is going to be a Hollywood movie someday. I'll tell you it will, assuming we're still alive.
I'm feeling like Trump is going to come out of this on top because, as you said, I mean, he's decisive. He's saying what he feels is right, but also it seems right. How can these guys make up stories?
And the best defense is a strong offense. When you have the ball, and we've got the Super Bowl this weekend,
yep,
then the other team can't score. And this is what the president's best at. This is what I think I'm good at. You're good at other people. You have to be on the attack. You have to keep these people down. You can't let them get up off the mat. Now we have these corrupt individuals, this deep state in the Justice Department, throughout government. We've got the leftists as part of the Democratic Party, and I am nonpartisan. I've been tough on the Republicans as well. But now we've got them on the mat. Now we have to legally finish them off. We have to finish Mueller off. We have to get rid of Rosenstein. We have to disinfect this Justice Department. We have to legally exterminate the rats at the Justice Department. They're running all over the Justice Department. and it's frightening.
I'm anxious to see people prosecuted and incarcerated. I know you feel like that's unlikely to happen, but even characters like Andrew McCabe, who was the deputy director of the FBI while all of this was going on, and by many accounts, he was really the action man, where Comey was more of the mouthpiece for the FBI. McCabe seems to be implicated in all kinds of shady dealings.
Well, you raise a very good point because, as I said, I've been doing this for 30 years. Okay, I started Judicial Watch back in 1994, a little less than 30 years. But I've never seen any accountability. The only accountability that has occurred is the accountability that I was able to create and do at Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch. In the last 3 years, for instance, we got 2 injunctions against the NSA for illegal surveillance. We killed Obama's amnesty in a court case in Texas. And, of course, the Bundy trial was a great victory. But it doesn't happen that often because both sides cover it up because they know today it's the Democrats, tomorrow it's the Republicans, so we'll let everybody walk off scot-free. It's great to go on Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC. We can get reelected. We can be big shots. But the American people get screwed.
Yeah. There was something that was mentioned in the opening for the show that you're the only lawyer to get a judgment against a president for doing a crime. Who was the president and what was the crime?
It was a ruling, and it occurred with Judge Royce Lamberth, one of the really fine judges I've been up in front of in all my career. And it was when Bill Clinton released the Privacy Act protected files of a woman he had sexually harassed in the Oval Office, Kathleen Willey.
Oh, yes.
That was a violation of the Privacy Act that has both civil and criminal penalties. And Lamberth ruled that Clinton had committed a crime.
That's actually a good entree to get some input from Charles, because I know that Charles is personal friends with Kathleen, and I imagine that he might have something to say about that.
Well, it's interesting because after that ruling was made in the Filegate litigation, that was when the Clintons got 900-plus FBI files on their adversaries illegally. That was, in effect, what lawyers call collateral estoppel, and it means that the issue was decided by a court that Willey's rights had been violated. And I then represented Kathleen Willey. She came to me, and I said, this is a chip shot. We can bring a case for them violating your constitutional rights and the Privacy Act. And we filed a lawsuit. We had a press conference in front of the court here in Washington. And all of a sudden, one day she called me up. She says, Larry, I want to dismiss the case. And I think she was threatened by the Clinton people. She was scared to death. She had been threatened before by them, her children and everything else.
That's
and
interesting.
it never actually came to a judgment for her, but I got a ruling from Lamberth that, in fact, Clinton had criminally violated her rights.
Wow.
So you can ask Kathleen about that. Right.
I will. So if I'll jump in here just for a second and remind everybody that we speak of Rod Rosenstein, the attorney who I guess he was an associate special counsel, I believe, who decided that there was no wrongdoing with those 900 files was none other than Rod Rosenstein.
Huh.
And then
I didn't even know that. Thank you, Charles. Thank you for.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Look, these people, they're like, they burrow in like cockroaches. I mean, that's the thing. I think we need Orkin to go over there and basically disinfest this whole place.
Before ServPro gets there. But the thing that's really important to stress here, when people talk about as now Schumer and Pelosi are saying it would be a bigger constitutional crisis to rid us of Rosenstein and others, we need to go over facts that are on the FBI vault file. Jason and I have done quite a few shows on this, but briefly, there's a 2-part FBI vault file that's in the public domain on the William J. Clinton Foundation investigation, which occurred from 2001 to 2005. The lead FBI person on that was Bob Mueller. The lead justice person was James Comey. The person in justice at the time who had the point on whether to do criminal matters or not was Christopher Wray. Tax matters, Rod Rosenstein. And for 4 years, these people could not see the obvious massive frauds at the Clinton Foundation.
Well, they didn't want to see the obvious, Charles. They didn't want to see it. They're partisans.
Right. Well, I'm just saying. So that's 2001 to 5.
Right.
And then after that, when Rod Rosenstein went in to be U.S. attorney in Maryland, he couldn't see the obvious problems at Ranbaxy that are far beyond the generic AIDS drug manufacturer, far beyond what they were punished for in 2013. That investigation took way too long. It took 6 or 7 years when it should have been wrapped up far sooner. The justice was not as profound as it should have been. The fines weren't as big. The full extent of the fraud is not yet documented. Rosenstein was on that. Rosenstein, I think, missed the ongoing frauds involving laureate education in his joint venture with the Clinton Global Initiative. And I could go on and on and on. I mean, this has been a corrupt system. As you say, it's sort of a uniparty. Establishment Republicans, Democrats have been washing each other's backs when it suited them, going way back, probably all the way back to George H.W. Bush years, if not before then. And it's time to sweep that rot out.
Well, it is, and I've always said, in the words of Groucho Marx, I wouldn't want to be a member of a club that would have me as a member. I mean, this is a corrupt club, and, frankly, the American people are seeing it more and more. It started with Lyndon Johnson lying about Vietnam, then it went on to Watergate, and then it went on to Clinton and their 40-plus scandals. Then it went on to Obama and Fast and Furious and IRS Gate and everything else, and now it's reached critical mass. And what really scares me is that the American people who are becoming educated have lost faith in the government almost 100%, and we do need an honest government. We don't need a big government. I'm a Jeffersonian. But we need an honest government. We need a law enforcement system. And it doesn't have to be just Freedom Watch and Larry Klayman. It has to be, I'd like to collaborate with these government people. So right now we're left defenseless.
Well, I'm pleased that we've got, Larry, both you and Charles on the show right now because, Charles and I speak about this every week on Sunday with Charles, which is a show that we have on YouTube on Crowdsource the Truth. And Charles has been, I believe, pretty confident that justice will be served to the Clintons and their conspirators. And I know that you are a little bit less hopeful in that regard. So, do you think maybe with Trump, we've got a new sheriff in town, maybe finally things will be different? He certainly speaks and acts differently than his predecessors.
Well, I can bring about justice in the civil context, okay, and when they lie under oath, then I can start a criminal proceeding, criminal contempt proceeding. But that's why I need to be special counsel or somebody like me, okay? They need to
nobody
fire,
like you, Larry.
They need to fire, first of all, Sessions. He needs to be gone. Then they need to get rid of Rosenstein. They need to bring somebody in at the Justice Department who will let it rip, who's not worried about being part of the establishment and going to soirees in Georgetown and rubbing shoulders with the beautiful people of Washington, D.C., or Hollywood, for that matter. And thus far, in my lifetime, there's been nobody like that, if I do say so myself, in a Trumpism, except for me.
Well, I mean, Charles, what do you think? Does this memo sway you one way or?
Yeah, I mean, so what Jason and I decided long ago, we couldn't hope for justice just to happen inside the United States of America. Now, fortunately, the Clinton Foundation charity frauds operate all over the world, and they have indeed defrauded government donors and private foundations around the world, in our view, and the record shows it. The record is in the public domain.
And we're going to come back, Charles, and talk about that. We've got a final segment. But again, I want to tell people to go to freedomwatchusa.org and sign our petition to have me appointed special counsel. We'll be right back.
Before he was a trial lawyer, he sliced him and diced him.
People used to ask me, Larry, what caused you to start Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch, given the powerful forces in this country that put you at risk?
In a meat packing plant.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
A very special prosecutor, Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
Back with Charles Ortel and Jason Goodman. We've been talking about this Nunes memo, which raises the specter of the biggest scandal in American history. We're talking about what to do about it. It's really just the tip of the iceberg because what my whistleblower client, Dennis Montgomery, will tell you, the mass surveillance against the American people continues to be rampant, and that's our next goal, is to educate the American people. I have lawsuits pending about that in court, but it's a serious matter because we cannot live in an Orwellian state. And we cannot live in a state where things like the Clinton Foundation get to go off scot-free. And Charles obviously is an expert on that. I brought cases with regard to Hillary and Bill Clinton over the years. I can't even count how many. But, Charles, give us your thoughts on what we need to do about Miss Hillary, who I call the Wicked Witch of the left, and her lovely husband, Slick Willie, Bonnie and Clyde of American politics.
Well, we've been working for some time now, Jason and I and others around the world, on a two-pronged campaign. Inside the United States of America, I believe, and Jason believes and others, that the Clinton Foundation is vulnerable because it never was organized or operated lawfully to do anything other than be a library and research center in Little Rock. So all this other stuff, fighting climate change and HIV/AIDS, flying around the world in fancy jets and all that kind of stuff, none of that was lawfully done as a charity. And so they are vulnerable for having solicited across state lines in the many states and localities inside the United States where you must register in advance, where you must be truthful in your declarations. They've done none of that right. And worse, they've taken money from foreign governments, massive amounts of foreign governments. The biggest donor to the Clinton Foundation of the $2.3 billion in which they've declared is a Swiss organization that's basically a collection of governments that has given it $650 million to fight HIV/AIDS out of an outfit in Massachusetts whose authority to operate was revoked.
Did they put any money aside for Bill? He must have it by now.
Yeah, it's a miracle.
Right.
And his drug regimen is expensive, probably. But, so $650 million. The categories that they use to tell you about the donors is the biggest one is $25 million and up. Obviously, they don't want you to know how concentrated this one donor is. And furthermore, that donor issues financial reports, and you can cross-check what they say they sent to the Clinton Foundation, and it doesn't match with what the Clinton Foundation says it got. So there have been massive diversions of donor funds. They have not correctly identified the various governments' precise amounts which they sent towards the Clinton Foundation. And as we've been saying on our show, this is the largest set of unprosecuted frauds, not in American history, but in world history.
Well, and that
with all its affiliates. Hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars.
I appreciate what you're saying, what Jason said. We're going to have you on in future shows. You guys are very, very bright and articulate. But I just want to say at the end of the show, and I have to constantly pump this. You know, I really don't want to. When I ran for the Senate in Florida, I was very shy about asking for contributions. Probably one reason I didn't win because, you know, you have to just be shameless in that regard. But I'm going to be shameless right now, is that we need your financial support. We need to ramp up. We need to get bigger. We're the only organization out there that will go the limit, that will risk everything to bring about justice. I don't believe, based on past history, the past is a prologue, that we are going to see justice for very many people here. Probably none. It'll probably be a big event like it was with Chinagate back in the 1990s. Along came Monica Lewinsky. People wanted the sex thing, but they forgot about all the bribery from China, and that was involving the Clintons. It was involving the library, everything else. But it's why you need a Freedom Watch. It's why you need a Larry Klayman, because there's nobody that I know of. I said this before in the show, Charles, before you came on, that there's nobody that will go the distance here in Washington, D.C., and it's a frightening situation because we continue to decay ethically and morally. It was John Adams who said, before he signed the Declaration of Independence in 1776, without ethics, morality, and religion, you will not have a lasting liberty. It doesn't matter how many times you change your rulers or forms of government, the country will not survive. I'm paraphrasing. And we're at that point right now, and it's really frightening. So please go to freedomwatchusa.org. Please contribute generously to our cause. Sign our petition. We need you to be part of our citizens' army. We need to rise up doing it peacefully and legally, because if we don't do it that way, it's going to happen another way. I don't want that to happen. So go to freedomwatchusa.org. We'll be back next week with another edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman, with yet another scandal, undoubtedly, to talk about. God bless you, God bless America, and God save America.